our keynote speaker, Bret Hood, presenting Oops, I Stepped Into a Mess, Tips and Tricks for Financial Related Investigations. Mr. Hood?
Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Good. How many of you are awake? Good. Thank you, sir. All right, so just real quick about me. I spent 25 years in the FBI, mostly working in financial investigations. Spent my last 4 years at the FBI Academy, teaching leadership ethics. And I retired at 16, been doing this ever since. And I kind of have a rule that I want to start with, all right? Kind of deals with adult abuse, elderly abuse, stuff like that. Here's my rule. I want to see if you all agree with me. All fraud eventually leads to Florida. Pretty much true, isn't it? I've spent 16 years in Fort Myers, Florida. And I will tell you that almost every case all over the world ends up in Florida, and it deals with fraud. And I dealt with a lot of senior citizens, a lot of adults that were abused, not only by family members, but also by other people not even related to them. It became kind of an art form, right? And it's sad, isn't it? So what I want to do today, and I want to remind you that this is your class, not mine. So I'm scared, you got me for like an hour and a half, all right? If there's something you want to go into in more detail than I had planned, just tell me, and we'll get into it, okay? I want to make this as interactive as possible because I have 3 goals every time I do a class. First one is, I want you to learn something new. Does that sound good? 2, I want you to think about behavior, because behavior is not as simple as what we think, right? 3, I want you to have fun, because if you have fun, you remember. So, are we ready to get started? Yes. All right, here we go. Here's your complaint. What are you going to do? What I want you to do is after you read it, get with people at your table, start discussing what would be the next steps you take in this matter. Once you're done, start talking to people at your table. Let's figure out what we can do. And what is APS going to tell you? Call law enforcement. All right. Now we come back. And what's law enforcement going to tell you? Call APS. All right? And then eventually you're going to get somebody to say, call the FBI. And what's the FBI going to tell you? Absolutely nothing. You know? Absolutely nothing. Right? What is, you were had to investigate this on your own. What's one of the first things that you would do and why? Go ahead.
You would apply to your local magistrate for a search warrant.
Apply to your local magistrate for a search warrant. Would everybody agree with that? Well, my law enforcement guy said, why would you say no?
Magistrate says yes.
It's what now?
Magistrate says yes.
Magistrate says yes. I like that.
Any person may apply to the magistrate for a search warrant.
Correct.
They are held to the same standard
Correct.
as any affiant on a search warrant to provide probable cause that what they're seeking is evidence of a criminal offense.
Let me ask you this. Do you have, does everybody think about this? Do you have enough probable cause to get a search warrant based on just this right now?
No,
Right.
not just on that.
Right. So, I mean, what we have to do is get probable cause, right? Hold on one second. Go ahead. You talk about anything people involved with? Okay.
While you're trying to get the records, you should be talking to the
Okay. What do you say?
Yeah, what I was going to say, and I think that's good, but I was going to say, why can't Debbie, she's in the county herself, just get the records?
Does Debbie what? What's Debbie doing? She had power of attorney and all these other things. Now you're sounding like a cop over here. So he's like, she came in and she was giving me information, her lips were moving, which means she's lying. Right? What else? Go ahead.
I mean, I would just start off by interviewing Debbie and finding out there's not much clarity in what you're saying. So I want to find out if it's possible in her home or if she living at this adult home with clients all about, why can't she get, why isn't her brother giving her the bank statements so she's signing on the account? What's her mother's mental state? Is she in this home because she's got dementia? Just, why does she think it's fraudulently obtained? I want to get with her and try to clarify more than what the house.
You want to get some of the basis of what's led to this conclusion.
Yeah, and then from there, you go about subpoenaing records.
Okay? Go ahead.
Expose yourself to the States Corporation Commission and find out all you can about the LLC. Because if they're doing stuff, the more you can find out about the LLC and its activities, the closer you may come to meeting your standards.
So he's basically saying, find out about the LLC, find out about what other things are happening here. What can you do to check to find out? First of all, is Debbie credible? How many of you have had people come to you that were not credible at all? Right? So, what's the negatives? You mentioned going to interview. Debbie, I think, is a logical one. But what about interviewing other people? What are the positives and negatives of doing so?
I think talking to test the mother, get a first-hand knowledge of her mental capacity. You can see where she stands. What can she tell you? She's a vital source of information. You can tell a lot about what's going on, and they're trying to kind of play mind games with that whole situation.
Okay. So she says, to those of you who can't hear over here, she says, talk to Tess, the mother, because you can learn a lot of things that happen. Let's stop here for a second. All right? How do people feel, especially elder people? How do they feel when they've been victimized?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed. Right? What does that that do to them? Are they going to be eager to tell you? Right? So I'll give you this story here. There was a guy, his name was Ron Brown. He gets sucked in by one of my fraudsters, right? And it's a classic way it happened. A lot of husbands can relate to this. He owned a bunch of healthcare facilities in Indiana. He gets older, eventually sells them out to some corporation, makes millions of dollars. And he decides, you know what, let's leave Indiana, let's go to Florida, thinking that's a great place to retire. True. But he discounts the fact that every other person you meet in Florida is a fraudster, right? And so he's got all this money and he's in stocks, he starts trading the stocks. And they moved in this little beachfront house, which is beautiful. And he's got this little office space in his house, and he's trading his stocks there. But his wife decides that she needs that space for something else. And so he gets moved into the garage. Right? You've been in Florida, in the heat, in the summer, and the garage is not really that comfortable. So he gets an air conditioner. Guess what happens next? His wife decides that she needs that space as well. So he finally says, you know what, I'm going to go out and rent a little space in Naples. And there's this little common office complex in Naples. He shows up there, and he starts doing this trading. You know, it's his money. He's not taking any big risk or anything like that. But while there, he meets a guy named Jack. And Jack is a friendly sort. Jack is about 30 years old at the time. Him and his girlfriend had just opened up a mortgage business. And they started talking. And Mr. Brown learns that Jack is into stocks as well. So for the next 60 days, what do they talk about? Stocks. And he goes up to Mr. Brown every day and says, Mr. Brown, what do you think is going to happen in the stock market today? I think it's going to go up. And that day it goes up. Next day Jack comes in. Says, Mr. Brown, you were right. That's amazing. Right? Next day, stocks go down. Mr. Brown said they go up. Jack doesn't say anything. Bummer day, Mr. Brown. But every time he's right, it just reinforces it. It's like, hey, how you doing? And when you get to the point Jack has got his business going, do you think that Jack has to ask Mr. Brown for any money? Or does Mr. Brown offer it? After about 60 days of talking, Mr. Brown says, hey, I realize that, you're a new business, you could use some capital. How about I lend you $1 million, you pay me this amount of interest, and we'll be good. And Jack assures him that they can afford it, even though the interest rate at the time is 7%, the market is bearing 2%. But according to Jack, because the way they turn over mortgages, they can easily meet that obligation. What happens that first $1 million? It's gone. Right? But Mr. Brown doesn't know that. And after, receiving his money on the first of the month, every month for like 2 years, Mr. Brown says, hey, let's increase it to $8 million. Jack says, sure. A few years later, said, let's increase it to $15 million. Because Mr. Brown is getting 7% on $15 million when the bank is going to pay him 1%. Is that incentive? But eventually Mr. Brown says, you know what, it's time. I've lynched this money, it's time for me to reel it back again. What happens then? That's when they call the FBI. Because everything collapses, right? So when I went to interview Mr. Brown, how do you think it went? Was he talking? Do you know what he actually did? He wouldn't talk to us. I interviewed his wife, who had only secondhand knowledge. Mr. Brown didn't come out of his bedroom for 2 months. Why? He's embarrassed, right? And if you think about it, especially when it comes with males of that generation, who was the leader of the family? Who was the provider of the family? Mr. Brown had all these plans for his grandchildren. I was going to pay for their college. I was going to do all these things. But now $15 million is gone. Is there an impact on how he feels? Is there going to be an impact of you trying to get information out of him? Right? We're going to talk about what are some best ways that we can get information out of people who are embarrassed by what happened. And he was embarrassed. In fact, you kind of feel bad for him because his children and his wife came in and he was no longer allowed to make any financial decisions for the family at all. Now think about that. What would that do to your ego, your confidence, if your children, if your family members came in and said, we're taking this all away from you? That's what you're going to be dealing with these victims. So if you go into one of these interviews of a person who's been ripped off like this, one of the things that you want to have to do is to start trying to build back up their confidence. Right? I'll give you one other quick story. I had a victim lost $2 million. Guess where he worked? Harvard. One of our smartest people, who's a professor at Harvard, he lost $2 million. And he felt stupid. Had another case. Guess who the victim was? An FBI agent who was in my office. And I told him it was a fraud. And he still didn't believe me. He believed me when I did the search warrant. Right? These are the types of things you want to keep. I have no problem with interviewing tests. But understand when you go into that interview, there's going to be some things that you're going to have to work with, how you're going to have to work around. You may have to build up their confidence. Okay? How are you going to build up somebody's confidence that has been ripped off? What can you do? Well, get creative with me. What can you do?
Make sure they know they're not the only person this has ever happened to.
Right. That's number one. Make sure they're not the only person it's ever happened to. Right? And then ask yourself this question. You can ask them the same thing. How many of you have ever done something stupid? Yeah. I have a 17-year-old daughter who reminds me every day of things I do stupid. Right? Now, there's some days I want to give her away, so if anybody wants an extra one, please let me know. But today she's on my good list, so we're good, right? But haven't we all done something stupid? Haven't we all made a mistake? Yeah. So we start to get relatable with that. We start to tell people like we've made these mistakes, right? What else can you do? What's the negatives of going to interview other people, such as the judge, the adult home director? What's what? Puts them on alert, right? Is that true? Right? So every step you take in your investigation, especially when you take these overt steps, these ones out in the open, are you taking a chance that you're letting somebody know what you're doing? Right? Is that a calculated risk? Right? So I remember I used to always wait to interview the suspect as the last person interviewed. Is that common what you guys do? Yeah. I kind of changed my practice after this because I had one guy who stole $7 million. Wasn't an adult thing, it was more like investment fraud. But I remember I got the complaint, started doing all my stuff, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Started doing all the checks, everything that I did, and interviewed the victims, went to everybody, got all the financial records, did everything I was supposed to do. And finally, 2 years later, it's time to knock on his door. Knock on his door, he comes to the door. I said, hey, I'm Bret from the FBI. He's like, I usually don't get this kind of greeting. But he says, hey, Bret, how you doing? Come on in. I'm like, you know why I'm here, right? He's like, yeah, I heard about you 2 years ago. I heard you were doing an investigation. I'm like, really? He says, yeah, I knew we'd eventually get to this point. And I'm like, really? And then he says this. He says, I'm going to confess. And I'm like, okay. And so we spend the next 2 hours and he confesses to everything. Gives me every detail. Doesn't really lie about too much because they always lie about something. We didn't really lie too much. And so then I asked him this question. If I would have came here 2 years ago, would you have done the same thing? He's like, yeah, I'm not going to call you. So I'm like, maybe going after the person who did this first may be the thing. So the point is, it depends, right? There's no wrong step in these investigations. There's only things that you do. You take these calculated gambles. What else would you do? All right? First thing I would do in this case is I look at Debbie. I look at her and say, what's the incentives? How many of you know family members who are trying to get access to other people's fortune? And isn't that sad? You know, 'cause I mean, I've had tons. I had a good friend of mine called me out of the blue and told me his brother had embezzled about $800,000 from their parents' estate. I'm like, how does this happen? What do you all think? How do you think people rationalize this kind of behavior?
Say a very personal case, it was, well, I'm helping them out, they owe me.
And it's a personal case. I'm helping them out. They owe me. Right? Would you ever do it? Let's do a little test. All right? I teach ethics. It's one of the things I taught at the FBI Academy. I teach it now for the University of Virginia. This is my absolute favorite class to teach. I usually do it over 2 hours. We're going to do the lightning round version. Because I know they want me to be out of here by 10 p.m. tonight, and I definitely make it not. Now, I like this one because, I mean, especially in crowds like this, I want to show you how easy it is to rationalize behavior. All right? So, lightning round version, I want you to rate yourself ethically on a scale of 1 to 10. If you give yourself a 1, that means you're not ethical at all. Give yourself a 10, you are absolutely ethical, just like my police officer right here. All right? 5 is in the middle. So everybody, give yourself a number between 1 and 10. 1, you're not ethical at all. 10, absolutely ethical. 5 in the middle. Everybody got a number? How many of you went below a 7? What did you say? A 2. Ethical, not ethical is 1. Conversation outside. Right? So all of you are above a 7. And I would expect that for what you do. But would you be surprised to know that I am a 5? In reality, I'm probably a 4. Maybe you're not surprised by the articles you see about the FBI anymore. But I have a feeling that you all will join me at a 5, especially if we got 2 hours. Let's do the lightning round version, all right? So all my 7s and aboves, my 2 turned into a 9. All right? I want you to rate this behavior. Okay? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give you behavior. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 means it is not bad at all. Who cares? 10, very bad. 5 in the middle. Ready? How bad is it to share your Netflix password with someone outside your family?
Oh, come on.
Come on, how many did this? He just dropped 4 points. All right. How many said that's a 1 or 2 or something like that? Why? Why is it a 1 or 2? Why is it not bad? It's what? It's more. They're rich enough. Right? Netflix makes enough money. They're not going to miss my $16.99, whatever it is now. Right? And everybody does it, don't they? Okay, next behavior. Get lightning round. Otherwise, we talk about this a lot more. How bad is it to go into a local restaurant, order food, eat it, and leave without paying, even though the food was fine and you have the means to pay? That's a 10. Okay, you tell me that's a 10. Why is it so bad? It's a crime. I like that. It's a crime. What is the Netflix thing then? Aren't they both stealing? Because when you know the agreement that nobody ever reads, it says that you can't share outside your home with other people in your family and stuff like that.
It's a faceless crime.
It's a what? Faceless crime. Yeah. So if we have a faceless crime, it's okay. Right? And what we're describing here, ethically, we call it psychological distance. It is the distance we put between our actions and the consequences of those actions. The people that are committing adult abuse have already created the psychological distance they need to rip off their family members. In a lot of the cases, when a guardian is appointed, I don't even look at that ward as a person. I look at them as a bank account. I look at them as something like that, as someone to meet my needs. That's what psychological distance does. All right? And if we would have done this for the normal time, you guys would have started rationalizing your behavior like nothing. Right? Let's do a couple more real quick to highlight how your people, because I believe that if you understand how the people that are committing these types of crimes are thinking, then you can better go after them. Okay? So now, same scale 1 to 10. 1 not bad at all, 10 very bad. I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine your dream vacation. It can be anything you want it to be. You can bring whoever you want. Doesn't matter. All right? You save for a year. Finally the time comes, now it's time to go, and the vacation is everything that you hope for. It's absolutely perfect. You're having the time of your life. Now the vacation is over. And you're like, man, it was worth it. I had the best time. It's something I'm going to remember forever. And then they give you that bill for the discretionary spending. And you don't care. It's 20 pages, but you don't care. I save money. You get to the last page, you look at the bottom line figure. It is 3 times more than what you expected and what you saved. So now you're like, holy crap. You start flipping through the pages. And on page 13, you see that they forgot to charge you $1,000 for something that you did. How bad is it to stay silent and say nothing? If we don't do a background on that table back there, don't worry about that. Right? What number would you give that? You stay silent and say nothing. 1 is not bad at all, 10 very bad. What number would you give? 9? Why? You're still cheating them out of it, right? Anybody disagree with her? What do you say?
Well, they don't have their processes down there, but we're responsible.
Yeah, it's their fault. Right? It's their fault for not catching it. They don't have their processes, they're billing things right, then shame on them, right? Can I ask you a question?
I don't know.
That's a great response. All right, so I'm just going to float this out there. You answer it if you want. I want you to think about the same exact thing. Dream vacation, wherever you want, you go, it's wonderful, everything is perfect. End of vacation, the bill comes, 20 pages, you flip through it, page 13, it shows that they charge you $1,000 for something that you did not incur. What do you do now? You would absolutely bring it to their attention. But no, wait. It's their processes, so it should be okay, right?
I selected to choose.
Selected and choose. And so basically what you're telling me, and you're not alone, there are other people who are thinking the same thing. What you're basically telling me is that your ethical decisions depend on whether or not it benefits you.
I have a little contention with this thought that it's unethical, but yes.
Yes. Right? And so now we start looking at the people who do these types of things, and then you see how easy it is to rationalize it away. Even though it might be my mother, my father, and I'm ripping off my brother, my sister. How bad is it to lie about your age or your weight? 1, -2. Right?
Depends how big the plane you're getting on is.
You have a point there. He says it depends on how big a plane you're getting on, because I walked into an airport, I gave my ID and all this stuff, check in, the guy says, how much do you weigh? I'm not even thinking, I just throw out there, 190 pounds. And he's got a little notebook next to him, and I watch him. He writes down 205. I look at the guy, I'm a little bit upset. I look at him and said, hey, dude, I said 190, you wrote down 205. He gets angry. He puts his pen down, he crosses his arm, he looks at me and says, Mr. Hood, says, everybody lies about their weight. I add 15 pounds to everybody because I have to balance the plane to make sure it won't crash. So I add 15 pounds to everybody. I look at him, I say, oh, okay, I get it now. Might want to write down 210. All right, last one I'll give you and move on, I promise. How bad is it to exceed the posted speed limit? I can see a lot of guilty faces now. And so what you're telling me is ethically the rules don't really apply to you. They're merely a suggestion. Especially where? Oh, we have cops around here, better be careful. Alright? So now we're see, they're like, I'm making a note, see what kind of car she drives when we leave. Big company car. But I do that, I do that exercise to show you how easy it is to rationalize behavior, right? So all of you said you're above a 7, I would venture to say that you're all like a 5. You're right in the middle, just like it just depends on the situation. So as we get to this stuff, I'm looking at Debbie, and I'm saying, what's her motivation? I'm looking at the other one saying, what's their motivation? Is there a fight? How many of you want to get involved in a fight between family members? Right? That was the quickest way for the FBI. They called me up to get me out of this. And this is a family issue. It ain't an FBI issue. Right? But I've since, well, I did last year, I did a conference for the National Guardianship Association. And if I could go back in my FBI career, I would probably start paying more attention to some of these cases. Because as I look back on it, I was too quick to dismiss them. You know, it didn't help that I had 25, 30 other cases which had like $5 million losses. But as I look back, especially in Florida, there's a lot of this stuff. There was a lot of guardians who were stealing millions upon millions of dollars. Right? And I can rationalize it easily. In fact, I've seen some of the cases where older people living in squalor because the guardian has taken all the money away. Right? But now that you know, we can all rationalize this behavior easily. You are better equipped to deal with these people. All right, so we've got this stuff here. One of the first things I would do is check out Debbie. Let's say that she comes back fine. She seems legitimate. Everything looks good. Next thing I'll do is I'll look at public records. Here's what I find. Take a look. Tell me what you think. What are your thoughts now? You what? The whole case is on hearsay. The whole case is on hearsay, right? But are we looking at other things that we can find? What I love about the internet is that there's so much information out there now that we can try to corroborate everything that he says without anybody knowing that we're looking. Right? Because the minute you tip your hat and you show somebody, I can't tell you, and I think my cop friends will agree with me. I would go out to victims of a scheme and I'd interview them about what happened to them. And one of the things that I would usually tell them would be like, hey, it's in your best interest to keep this interview quiet. Because if the person finds out, the person that I'm investigating, if they find out about it, then they can start hiding assets. They can start moving money around, make it more difficult. And these people would always say, absolutely, Bret, I'll be happy to do that. As soon as the door closed, as soon as my car left the driveway, what did they do? And what did they say when they called in? If you give me my money back, I won't talk to the FBI anymore. Right? So one of the things that you have to consider is that if you're going to do this, if you're going to go out and you're going to talk to the interviews, I have no problem with that. I think that at some point, you have to do these types of things. But if you do it, understand what the consequences could be. Okay? The person that you're talking to could immediately go to the other person and spill their guts. If you don't have a problem with that, go for it. Okay? But there's all kinds of different things here. We see here, the judge has to file a personal financial disclosure. I don't know about Virginia, they have to do these things, but that is a great source of information. Right? So let's go look at the next one. Here's what you find here with the LLC information. Doesn't that make things a little bit more suspicious? Yes. Now it's usually not this straightforward, but you would be amazed at what some people do. Right? I will tell you this. We had a bank robbery in St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, Missouri was my first FBI office. And this is back in the day where the internet wasn't as prevalent. Back in like 1995, I think it was. How many of you drive one of those big old trucks? Okay? Somebody's running there. All right, we got one. Okay? So you can imagine this really easy. There was a standalone ATM machine. You all know what's going to happen next, don't you? He backs up his big old truck to the ATM machine, gets out of his truck, he wraps a chain around the ATM machine, ties it to his truck, pulls the machine out of the ground, some cash comes out, he takes it, runs off. 3 days later, the bank realizes we're missing an ATM machine. They call the FBI, we recover the machine, and sure enough, when he was wrapping the chain around the machine, that little camera in the front took a great picture. So this back in the day, internet wasn't prevalent. It was back when internet, when y'all, my older people remember this, my younger people, you ain't gonna remember this. But how many of you remember, like, you click on a picture, you go to the grocery store, you come back, you mow the lawn, maybe the picture was up. Right? So we put it in the newspapers on the news. Very next day, I have complaint duty, which means I have to sit in the office. It is not something I wanted to do. I split it among the agents, it just rotated it my day. I'm sitting at my desk having complaint duty. Phone rings. Hey, Bret, there's somebody up here to talk about the bank robbery. Okay, be right there. Go up to the front, I look in the lobby. I'll be dang if the person in the lobby don't look like the picture we got from the ATM machine. So I quickly grab another agent. We go to the room, we let him into our space, and he's sitting there, and he's got a newspaper. He puts it down on the table, and he says, that's not me in the picture. We said, thank you very much. Turn around, handcuff, move along. So it's usually not as direct as this, but it does happen, right? And some of the biggest mistakes that I've made is to think that they're not going to make a stupid mistake like that. And I don't look. Right? The way the FBI, the way we catch people is not because we're super smart. It's because people make mistakes and we find the mistakes. So if you found this, what does this tell you? Is it pretty incriminating? Yeah. Right? This is You know, the FBI, we call this, we have a special name for it. It's called a clue. Right? So we start looking at this, right? And then you look at the statement of financial interest for the judge. Take a look at that. I'll show you the next year's in just a second. So I always get more than one because I want to see what's happening over year to year. So just try to remember those best you can. Excuse me. Uh-oh, I'm about to lose my battery. While we're changing the batteries, look at this one. Here is the next year. Is that a clue? By the way, I pulled this from a United States congressperson. It's funny how they get in office and triple their net worth in a couple of years, isn't it? Right? But is this the kind of thing we're looking for? The liability is going down to almost zero?
It's over $1 million change.
Except for what?
That's over $1 million change there.
That is over $1 million change. You're an accountant.
Banker.
I knew. I got my math list, and that bank is on the count. Right? So it's $1 million change. And then, would you be interested in that, given what we know about the allegation? And then as we're starting to work through this, does this also start to support what Debbie has said? So one of the things that I'm looking for, especially when I get just an anonymous complaint or somebody comes in out of the blue, is how can I corroborate this information? And I remember we had a complaint against a doctor, a prominent doctor in Southwest Florida, right? And one of the issues that I had was, how do I look at this without divulging that I'm looking at it? Because what would happen to that doctor if all of a sudden the word came around and the FBI was looking at his practice? Right? And so I went and interviewed him, and I went and went up to the little desk where all the patients checked in, and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, discreetly flashed my badge and said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to the doctor." Put my badge away, just sat like I was an ordinary patient. About 10, 15 minutes later, they called me back, and we had a little conversation. I knew the doctor was guilty the next day. How did I know that? Because he called the FBI's, like, lack of a better term, their internal affairs, and said that Bret came in flashing his badge everywhere, scaring all my patients. And I'm like, that didn't happen. But that sure told me a lot. Right? When you start to do these checks, if you can maintain that discreet personality or something like that, that's beneficial. Because the last thing you want to do is ruin someone's reputation by saying, "Hey, we're out here looking for elder abuse." Is there a negative connotation with that? Yeah. Right? So now we've got a judge. How many of you are going to go ask questions about that judge? Is there an issue with asking questions about a judge? Think the judge will be really happy about that? No. Right? So you get politically sensitive people, what we call in the FBI politically exposed people. You have to be really careful with those. Right? So what I would do is I'd start focusing on some other things, try to build up that evidence more. And then you have this fiduciary duty, which is the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. Typically, these are used in civil lawsuits. Right? Duty of care, you see there, that the person has to act with a certain level of care. The case that I used to kind of describe duty of care is one you may be familiar with. How many people are familiar with the name Bernie Madoff? Yep, right? In fact, you know what's fascinating, I'm a faculty member for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And we talked about Madoff for, gosh, I think it was like 2 minutes in the session. But anyway, I had a person come up to me afterwards. And she was young, she was like 30 years old. She told me how she transitioned into a fraud career from, while she was going to college, she actually worked in one of those high-end stores like, gosh, what was it, Louis Vuitton or something like that? Is that how you say it? Okay. So we worked there, and she worked in Switzerland. And she said you know, I'm used to seeing celebrities. I see them all the time. Said, but I do remember Madoff. I'm like, why do you remember Madoff? I mean, Madoff wasn't a celebrity. She's like, no, but I remember him. And she said that when he came into the store, he was unlike the other ones. The other celebrities, like Clooney and other people like that, their girlfriend or whoever is in the store, they're shopping. Usually the celebrity's outside on their cell phone or doing something else, because they don't care about Louis Vuitton, right? Madoff was different. Madoff was in the center of the store. And everybody was watching Madoff. Said he had everybody in the palm of his hand. We couldn't stop. Everybody was stopped, including the other customers. They were just stopped and listening to Madoff. Are fraudsters good with people? Right? Good. So I want to do this test real quick. I want to give you a trait. And I want you to tell me how important is it to leadership. Okay? And I've got a reason for this. I'll explain in just a second. Right? Flexibility. How important is that to leadership? Well, first of all, how many of you hold leadership positions? How many supervise people? Good, good, good. Some of you little hesitant to raise your hand now. You're worried I'm going to trick you again? You may have a good reason for that. So flexibility is good. How about the ability to make tough decisions? Okay? How about the ability to take risk-appropriate decisions? How about the ability to generate empathy for others? Okay. I just gave you 4 of the 20 domains of the psychopath test. Right? If you look, and here's a great a book for you. It's called Snakes in Suits. And if you want to write this stuff, I'm going to give you a couple other books. If you want, The Easy Way Out, come get my card and then send me an email. Say, Bret, send me a book list. Snakes in Suits is on there. Right? Snakes in Suits is about corporate psychopathy. When we think of psychopathy, we think of those nasty serial killer movies where they just stab people right and left. Right? But there's a whole section of functioning psychopaths. Most of them end up as Fortune 500 CEOs or bankers. Just kidding. But not really. And you know what else besides bankers? Law enforcement. If you look, and what's interesting about these things, and some of these people that you're going to run into will have these sociopathic, psychopathic tendencies, you're going to like them. They are amazing. I think I've interviewed a few. I've never had any confirmed, but I remember interviewing them thinking like, I really like this person. This is fun. Right? When you start to get with these people, you're going to like them. How much does liking play a role in how you perceive them? 100%. It's one of those things. If you like somebody, it's why they're so good. It's because they get you to like them. Once you like them, you're like, yeah, I'll give them my $1 million. Yeah, they do due diligence, but that's okay. They're good people. Right? I'll tell you right now, Halle Berry, the actress, she can do nothing wrong in front of me. She can steal money. I don't care what she does. I like her, so I'm never going to arrest her. You know? My wife, she feels the same way about Tom Brady, so we're even. Right? But that liking helps, right? So Madoff got people to like him. And when you like him, you don't test him. And so what happened is there were a couple other traders that said, you know what, Madoff is making 20% per month. I'm making 1% per month. How about we take our investment money and give it to Madoff's fund? He makes 20%, we get our fee, everybody's happy. When it collapsed, people alleged that those traders had violated the duty of care and that a reasonable person wouldn't have done these things. But their lawsuits failed because they had no indication that Madoff was actually committing a fraud. But that was their basis of allegation. They said they were so careless that they should have known better. Right? That would be a violation of the duty of care. Right? So if our adult abusers, if they're guardians, whatever they are, if they're taking all that money, if they're doing stuff that puts that person, if they're being reckless with that person, that could be a duty of care violation. The other one is the duty of loyalty. Have to act in the best interest of the employer principal. Right? So now if I'm appointed guardian, I am supposed to act in the best principle of the person I represent. Is giving myself $1 million in the best interest of that person? There's a case out in Texas. I remember the guy had a classic car collection. Like worth, I think it was $15 million. Within 60 days of being appointed a guardian, the guardian liquidated that car collection for $15 million, charged $14.9 million in expenses. Yeah. You know, I have a certain lifestyle I have to lead. You know? That's what happened. That would be a violation of the duty of loyalty. Right? So one of the ways that you can get these people is to get that duty of loyalty, that duty of care. We, if you go to the law enforcement, we have to get that criminal domain, so we can usually use these things as a basis for a fraud type charge, especially if this is self-interest. Okay? So keep those in mind. Here's your basic bank statement. Which are the things that you would be looking at and why? My banker's been through this 3 times by now. She quit. What's one of the things you look at and why?
There's an awful lot of money going out to those principals of the LLC.
A lot of money going out to principal of the LLC, right?
And the LLC said.
Never at the 10,000 limit. What happens at 10,000? Yes, you have to report it, right? Take your 9,500 cash, and typically what happens is somebody that doesn't know it, there are very few people that don't know it anymore, you take 10,000 cash in, bank says, need you to fill out this form, he says, change it to 9,500. We still fill out the form.
I think one of the big ones there is grocery,
Why?
because it's so low.
Why is the grocery so
Because
low?
this woman's got to be eating more than $100 worth of food.
If you saw my wife and as skinny as she is, she eats a couple raisins for dinner. I joke with her all the time. Because I mean, I'm more than compensating for what she doesn't eat. Right? But yes, you've got a good point there. Why is the grocery bill so low? How many of you have ever been involved in a case where the adult is emaciated because they're not being fed? Right? And this could be a son or a daughter, it could be an outside person. I can rationalize that really, really easily. Right? Notice a lot of money going out to facilities that belong to that LLC, don't we? And now if I go back to you, ma'am, do we start having no probable cause for a search warrant here?
Getting there.
Yes. We're getting there, aren't we? So we start to look at the totality of things, right? We have cash, 9,500, Ryan Law, it's our family clinic, all these different things. We have the real estate closing of $45 million. How many of you would want to get the real estate statements? Right? How would you get, let's go back for a second. How would you get the bank records for this case? How? APS. APS can get it for you, right? What's another way to get it? Subpoena, right? What's a third way to get it? There's a little clue early on. Yes, Debbie was a signer on the account. All right? So I tell you this, one of the things that I carried around with me all the time, even though I could get a subpoena relatively easy, I carried around a consent form. Right? And you can find one online. My consent form was generic. Basically said, I consent to blank spot. And then I filled it in. Would it be telephone records? Would it be bank records? Whatever it is. Right? Had them sign their names. Even nowadays, with the way the internet has expanded, what's an even better way to get bank records? Instead of consent form, what else could you do? It's consent, but what else should you do once you get that consent? Have them download the records right there. I mean, if you carry a thumb drive with you, carry a hard drive with you, something like that. Have them download it as soon as they consent, because almost everybody, how many of you check your bank account balances all the time? I check them. My 17-year-old raids my account sometimes. Right? So I check them. When you do that, so nowadays, if I go get somebody and I say, they agree to give me their bank records, I'm going to do it right then and there. Because if once I leave, what are the chances that they withdraw that consent? Right? So when they're in that moment, when they're going to say, I'm going to get consent, Bret, let's get online, here's my thumb drive, let's download everything, put them on there. Right? Because I can always go back to the bank afterwards with a subpoena, something like that, say, is this a true and correct copy of the bank records? Yes, we're good. Right? So do it before they change. But how many of you have ever changed your mind? Right? So that's what happens. I want to do. Yes, ma'am.
But with her being labeled competent, does she have the legal right to give you access?
There's an issue there. So if she's labeled incompetent. So if I went to Tess Ocean, who was the actual owner of the account, that would be an issue to be litigated. That would be, I would still do it because I'd rather fight to get that stuff, that you can take your stuff as well. So it's kind of, it's a toss-up. However, what we had in the first is that Debbie, the complainant, was also a signer on the account. So if you remember in the complaint, it says that the brother won't give her the bank records. The brother doesn't have to. She's a signer on the account. I can go into the bank and say, she is an authorized signer. She has the means to get those things. Okay? And that comes down to a problem of framing. How many of you have ever heard of framing? Okay, I'm going to give you an example of framing in just a second. But framing is a decision-making bias. One of the classes I teach is something called implicit bias, which is unconscious bias. Framing plays a role into that. So now, I know that you are all still above 7 on the ethical scale. But I've got one more test for you. Okay? This one, I'm going to find out who is really ethical. So here's your scenario. You are driving a smart car. You know, one of those little cars? Right? You're driving a smart car, country road, middle of nowhere. You're driving down the road, you look in the distance, and you see someone in the middle of the road. They're waving their hands like this. And you start slowing down. As you get closer, you see, oh my goodness, that's my best friend. So now you stop the car, you roll down the passenger side window, and the guy on the road, your best friend, comes up the window and says, thank goodness you are here. My car broke down a quarter-mile away. I walked to this bus stop. I got to get downtown right now. If I don't get downtown now, I'm going to get fired. If we leave right now, we can just make it. So she's about to get in the car. A little old lady walks up to your window. She's holding her arm. She says, I made it to this bus stop. So I made it to this bus stop. Says, I'm not going to make it unless I get to a hospital now. And so you're like, whoa. And then you look in between both of them, and you see Halle Berry or Tom Brady. And you know, if you had 15 minutes that person, your life would be changed forever. How many of you going to give it to the old lady? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you going to give it to your best friend? How many going to tell me the truth? You give it to Halle Berry or Tom Brady? What's another solution? Pile up, what's another one?
Strap one to the top.
Strap them up on top? That's another solution. Did you think of it? Who said that? Who said that? What's the answer? Give your car to the friend, let him take the old lady to the hospital. You can stay behind with Halle Berry or Tom Brady. Congratulations. What she did there was something called reframing the problem. Okay? And so I led you right into a trap. Not surprising after now with me now. I led you right into a trap. And what it was is I said you have one seat available. What she did was she proved that she does not listen very well. What she did is she took a step back and she said, let me look at the problem from a different angle. And when I did that, I saw, well, wait a minute, I can have 2 seats if I do this. That is reframing. Okay? So ways that we start to become better as investigators is to start to look at things from different angles. Right? We get stuck in a rut, we decide, okay, this is what it is, and then we follow that all the way to the end. It leads to other things called sunk cost bias, where we invest our time and effort, and we don't want to let go of what our original thoughts are. Right? So, and I'll tell you this, I almost arrested an innocent kid early in my career. Believe me, I had the evidence that showed it was him, but a little bit further digging found out it wasn't him. And I learned in my career, not only, because I'm naturally going to look for the evidence of guilt. I had to teach myself to look just as hard for the evidence of innocence. Right? So when you're looking at these things, start asking yourself different questions. Start bouncing the idea off your colleagues here. Say, what am I missing? Reframe this. What can I do differently? You start doing that, you start to mitigate these biases. This looks pretty bad, doesn't it? Yeah. All right. So now, internet searches. You verify that all these things are here. How many of you search social media? How many of you can't keep up with the amount of social media accounts there are today? Okay, where are my young people at? My young people under 30. Anybody under 30? Good. Explain this to me. My daughter will pull out her phone and then she'll on some social media service, and she takes a picture like this where half of her face is showing, the other half is not, and she sends it off to her friends. What is that? What is that? Snapchat. Well, why do we do that? I don't know. Because I've asked her many times, and she says, "How would you do it, Dad?" I'm like, why not text something out or talk to people?
So I have a 20-year-old godson, and he didn't know I have Snapchat, but they think it disappears forever.
Yes.
Because you send it, it's read, and then it goes away, so they think it's actually gone.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they think all that stuff disappears. My daughter and I had a conversation about that at 13 years old. Told her about pictures that she might take or someone might request her to take. He said, it doesn't disappear. So she has learned that lesson. Not the hard way, luckily, thank God. But yeah, they think everything disappears. But I still don't understand why take a picture of half your face. That's what they do, right? These things, social media, guess what you find on social media? There's our 4 subjects there at their beach house. You want to know what's really interesting about these 2 pictures? They were created with artificial intelligence. How many have heard of ChatGPT?
Yes.
Yep. There's a little one that does pictures named Dall, D-A-L-L-E. I asked them to create me a picture of a beach house, create me a picture of 4 friends together. That's what came up. Right? But if this were real and this was social media, would that be good evidence to show? We've got an LLC that shows them all owning this property. We've got an LLC all 4 of them down there at the same time. Starts to become good evidence, doesn't it? Right? So now, you've got this information. Let's talk about your networks. How many of you feel like you have a great network of friends, contacts, colleagues? If you needed to vet something, you could vet something out. Okay? How can we increase that? How can we leverage these networks? How can we increase it? How many of you are part of my bank people? Answer this. Do you guys have a working group where you talk with other banks? Do you invite law enforcement? Do you invite people like these people? How many of you all show up to these things? Right? Because let me tell you, there is no better way to find these things out than to have a network of people that you can call. Right? The FBI. Anytime we got a new supervisor, so I remember this, I'm in Fort Myers. My boss decides that he wants to move up the chain and go to the next position, which they call an assistant special agent in charge. Right? He puts in for a couple, next thing you know, he announces that he got selected for the Denver position. Within an hour after it being publicly announced, how many calls do I have? From Denver. I got about 6 or 7. What's this new guy like? Right? That's the value of a network. Right? never. You have people that you can call. They may not be able to tell you certain things, but you might be able to get them information. Just read about a case yesterday, a kidnapping case. It was a Central America kidnapping, but the guy lived in Denver. So basically what the guy did was he basically bought old Tacoma trucks and then drove them all the way from Colorado, Wyoming, all the way down to Guatemala. Because in Guatemala, there's like 3 times the value. And so he made money that way when he got kidnapped down there. Right? And so they literally, I feel bad for him, they literally bashed out his front teeth. And they start calling his family and they say, we're going to kill him unless you pay for these things. They start out with a ransom of $15,000, eventually it comes down to $7,000. And so they go to pay the $7,000 and they go to the bank. And they explain to the teller what they're doing. Well, the teller actually kind of figures out what they're doing. And then the person asks one question. She says, by the way, where's this money going to in Guatemala? And the teller says, I can't tell you, but I can tell you it's not going to Guatemala. And the teller, the lady's like, what? She says, oh, I can tell you it's going to someplace in Denver, where they're from. Somebody on the inside set them up. And so the teller, I'm not going to tell you which bank it is because she'll get in trouble for this. The teller turns the screens around and then turns the other way. And now they see the name of the person. Right? So you get those contacts. In fact, IRS, even though my police officer, you ever dealt with the IRS? Yeah, fun, isn't it? Fun.
If you can get in touch.
Yeah, if you can get in touch with them. I cannot. I had friends back then. And you know what? I'm going to tell you this story. Don't get time yet. I worked with the IRS a lot. And we were working on these adult abuse cases here. And I remember we went and talked to a witness, a senior citizen who was a friend of the person. I remember knocking on her door and flashing my badge and saying, hey, I'm Bret from the FBI. And she looks at me and she goes, whoa. And after that, that was kind of cool. But then my friend from the IRS, she flashes her badge, she says, hi, I'm Tanya from the IRS. And the lady goes, whoa. Now I'm upset. So we do our little interview, we talk to her and stuff like that, and we finally get to the point where I'm like saying, hey, early in the interview, you know, I said, you're Bret FBI, you go, whoa, and then she said, Tanya, IRS, she goes, whoa! I'm like, why did she get a bigger whoa than me? And she summed up the IRS perfectly. She looks at me, and she says, you, I'm scared of. Her, I'm terrified of. And I'm like, why is that? She says, well, you, I've not done anything wrong. But her, even though I've not done anything wrong, she's still going to find something I did wrong. I'm like, that's it perfectly. Right? But we have to think. If I called my friend Tanya, I said, hey, I'm interested in this guy. What can you tell me about him? She'd tell me, I can't tell you anything. Because by their rules, she could not tell me anything. So we learned how to communicate in code. Right? And so I'd ask her, I'd say, hey, Tanya, said, I'm thinking about opening up a case on this guy. I've got some information here. Would you be interested in joining me in this case? And she'd say, I'll get back to you. And then, sure enough, a day or two later, she'd be like, yeah, I'm interested in joining. Or she'd say, no, not interested. What did she just tell me? Right. So, I mean, you may get bankers and stuff like that. There's ways that if you ask the right questions. One of the failures of people today, when you call to check a reference, how many of the people that you call say, I can't tell you anything about the employee other than the time that they worked here? Right? What's the best question to ask them? Are they eligible for rehire? If this one company would have done that, they would have saved themselves $7 million. Because she embezzled $7 million from a construction company. It was doing quite well. Some of the things she used her money on, she had 2 children. She wanted those children to be actors and actresses. So every 2 weeks, they flew from Fort Myers, Florida to Los Angeles first class to give her a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old acting lessons. Yes. And notice I said Florida, because all fraud leads to Florida. Right? So, networking. You've got a great group of people here. I see at least 3 cops here. Get to know them. Cops, get to know the people around you. You've got bankers. The more contacts you have, the better you are. How many of you are on LinkedIn? Good. I highly recommend LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. If you won't find me there, I'll give you the address a little bit later. But LinkedIn is a great source for getting people in other areas of the country. And so let's say that you've got some case here, you've got a need to interview somebody in another state, let's say California. You might be able to have a friend who will do that for you in California just by simply sending them a LinkedIn request. Or there's public records in California that you can't find. Still a few counties that don't have their records online. You might be able to find somebody to go do that for you. So I'm a big fan of LinkedIn because I also like LinkedIn. How many are on Facebook? Good. How many of you hate Facebook? I don't care what you have for dinner. I don't need to see a picture of it. Right? Right? I'm on Facebook. Don't find me there. But the only reason I'm on Facebook now is I'm 56 years old and I've got my high school friends on there. I want to find out which ones are dying and which ones aren't. Because it's starting to happen now. Right? But find ways to network. Bankings have meetings where they sometimes ask outside people to come in. There's these financial intelligence groups all in different regions, wherever the regions you work. See if you can find one of those or even start one of those. Start to throw those words around. When I was with the FBI, we had a bank financial intelligence group that met once every month. As much as I could, I made it out to those meetings because I wanted them to know who I was. First of all, I wanted them to have a person to call if they needed the FBI. Because if it was really bad and I really didn't want to work it, I always give it to somebody else. But if it involved a trip to Las Vegas, I'm taking that. Right? So get out there. Do these things. Start to network, get to know people. It's going to make your job that much easier. And when you want to corroborate something like that he says, call somebody. They may have the answer for you. Save you a lot of time. All right. Couple other things. What are some strengths and weaknesses to reporting to law enforcement? My non-law enforcement people, let's hear what you say. What are the strengths of going to law enforcement?
They can arrest people.
What is it?
They can arrest people.
One more time.
They can arrest.
They can arrest. Yes. Fun days. Right? Not if you're being arrested. Right? What else can they do? They have resources, tons of them. What else? In fact, won't they pretty much do the case for you?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Unless you get some bad ones, you get some FBI people say, yeah.
No, it's not that. It's not that at all. We have 45 days. Their investigations take a year.
45 days, yes, some take a year. I told you earlier, my average caseload in Fort Myers, Florida was about 25 to 30 cases. And I was insane for taking that many white-collar cases. I also had a couple of Russian organized crime cases and stuff like that. That was just fun. I even had a cattle rustling case in 2000. Cattle rustling. Yeah. I didn't think that happened anymore, but I was shocked. I was wrong. Florida, everything happens in Florida. Right? What are the weaknesses of talking to law enforcement? Besides time.
Depending on the community's relationship with law enforcement, it could go very sour very quickly.
Depending on the community's relationship, yes. Some communities do not trust law enforcement. Right? That's a negative. So you have to gauge that stuff. You know your community is better than anybody else. Gauge that. Know what will work, what wasn't. What's another negative for law enforcement? What's going to happen if you call me and you say, hey, Bret, how's the case going? Am I going to respond by saying, hey, it's going great. I've subpoenaed these 10 accounts. The bank records, you won't believe what I found there. No, by law, I can't say these things. But there are questions, just like you asked the IRS. There are questions you can ask me. Bret, are you still interested in any new information I might get? If I say yes, that usually means the case is going forward. If I say no, that means I'm done. I moved on to something else. Right? If I say stop bothering me, that means don't call me. Right? The negative side is that we can't give you alerts as to what's happening, how it's happening, all the stuff we have. The good side of it is if we complete it and we go to the point where someone's indicted, all the information that we've amassed becomes public and available to you. So, and we have easier access to a lot of stuff. I can get stuff outside of Virginia and other states. I can even get stuff overseas. Negative side, it takes time. You know, because I mean, average white collar case took about 3 years, 2 to 3 years for me to investigate. Time to prosecute took about 5 or 6 years because my prosecutor was just lazy. I can tell you times where I sat in one of the prosecutor's offices and he pulls out his guitar and he starts singing songs because he's tired. So I'm trying to draft an indictment charging somebody with a $20 million fraud. He's like, you know what, let's take a break, let's sing. I can't sing. So I left. That's negative, that's positive. All right, we talked about that. Let's talk about influencing techniques. How many of you want to influence people? That community that doesn't like law enforcement, you want to influence them? How many of you want them to do stuff for you? Right? How many of you like to learn a few ways to get people to do something without them realizing that you got them to do it? You cannot use it on your husband or your wife. You can use it on your kid. Right? First one you see there is called the rule of reciprocity. How many of you have ever ate at Olive Garden? Do you like Olive Garden? Because I think it's really bad food. I like the breadsticks though. The breadsticks are awesome. What does Olive Garden give you at the end of the meal besides a check? Mints. Do you know I can increase my tip by 30% if I do something at the end of that meal? If I put your name on it, you draw a little smiley face, that helps. But if I say, Kathy, here's your bill, here's a couple of mints, thank you so much for coming. 1, 2. You know what, Kathy? Here's a couple extra. On average, the tip increased by 30%. Right? In fact, I had a guy from Alabama in class one day. I told this story, and from the back of the room I hear, son of a! I'm like, what? He said, I did there last night. I said, did it work? He was like, yeah, it did. Right? If you do someone a favor, there's an automatic compulsion for them to return that favor. Right? So, what law enforcement, we had to do some things because normally you bring somebody a drink or something like that, that's one of those favors. Law enforcement, they kind of expected us to do that, so I had to do something else. I would put, if I ever did an interview in our office, I put the most uncomfortable chair in the room, and I'd have them sit, and I'd make them suffer for 5 minutes. They'd be squirming all around trying to find a comfortable position. There was none. But right outside the room, I had that nice comfortable chair. The one that when you sit in, the air just goes shh. So after 5 minutes, I'm like, I'm sorry, that chair is so uncomfortable. Let me get you a better one. Bring that chair in and sit down. You see them, their face. They'll be like, and then be more relaxed. And now, it still doesn't mean they give me what I wanted, but there would be that compulsion to return that favor. In fact, my favorite study ever comes from the University of Utah. How many of you send out Christmas cards every year? Okay. This University of Utah professor back in like 1985 decided that he's going to send out 600 Christmas cards to people he doesn't know. He went into a phone book. Phone books are these little books that we have. He randomly picked 600 names, sent them a Christmas card, complete with a family update. Now these people have no idea who he is. 80% of them returned by sending another Christmas card. That's what makes it my favorite, though. My favorite is, it's been 30 years later, some people are still sending in those Christmas cards. Right? Rule of reciprocity, when we do something, we have an urge, compulsion to give it right back. Second one, reject retreat. One of the classic negotiation techniques. You'll see this in the used car business or the new car business. That is, I make you an offer. You say, you know what, let me take that back. And then I give you a roll offer. And what that does is that gives you the perception that I'm negotiating, I'm willing to bend. I've given you something, so now you need to return the favor by giving me the price that I want. Okay? The consistency principle. How many of you have ever done this? How many of you have agreed to help one of your friends move? How many of you said, as soon as you said yes, those should have been inside words, not outside words? Because nobody wants to help you move, right? So I bet when the time came that you showed up and you helped that person move. Once we say we will do something, then we follow through with it. What I always try to do, especially in interviews or something like that, is I try to get people to commit to something. Can I count on you to be honest? Now they're going to lie to you still, but mentally you've just made it more difficult for them to do so. Okay? So it causes what they call cognitive dissonance, that stress up in the brain. How many of you have been on diets before? Isn't that the day when you start your diet when they bring in those sweet treats, like those little pastries over there? Well, what you're doing is you're feeling that mental stress. You're deciding, like, should I eat that or not? You see which one I chose every time. I eat it. My diet can always start tomorrow. But by getting people to say honesty, you're trying to get them into that cognitive state where they promise to do something. Last thing I want to get over here is this little concept called active listening. All right? It's an interview technique. I call it the secret sauce of the FBI. It's why we can develop rapport with people. The first one is that minimal encouragement. As somebody's talking to you, and you can all feel free to do this with people around you. They taught waiters and waitresses how to do this. Their tips increased by 40% that night, even though they felt stupid doing it. Right? So minimal encouragers are this. You're talking to somebody, and as they're speaking, you're going, okay, You're nodding your head yes. You're giving those. What that does is it shows that you're engaged in the conversation. You're listening. And that gives them that visual or that audio reaffirmation that you're there. Open-ended questions. Love these things. Tell me what happened. That's an open-ended question. What'd you do at 10 o'clock? That's a closed question. Stay with the open-ended questions. Allow them to insert their feelings. Now, obviously, there's a caveat to that. If you ask them a question and they start with, well, God created the sun and the earth. We can move forward a little bit. Right? Third, we're reflecting and mirroring. What that is you are reflecting, mirroring their behaviors. So as I'm watching somebody, as I'm watching her right here, she's got her hands like this. So at some point when I'm talking to her, I'm going to move my hands just in her position. I'm going to mimic some of the words that she's saying. Now, I'm not going to do it right away. If she does this, I'm not going to make her go, oh. I'm going to do it gradually. Because what happens in the brain is we don't even realize it. We start to feel connected to that person because they're doing the same things as us. And that is important. The other one, emotional labeling, another really great one. If you start talking to somebody and they start giving you the emotions that they're feeling, just identify them. You sound frustrated. Tell me what that's like. You sound angry. That emotional labeling brings them even closer to you. Paraphrasing, you're just restating what they've said as you go along, just to show them you're still involved in conversation. The I message is, how can I help you? What can I do to get you past this situation? What can I do to keep you from being frustrated? Right? Then you go to effective pauses. Cops love these things. Because somebody will tell you a lie, and I never confront them on the lies, not initially. They tell me a lie, and I look at them and I go, oh, okay. And what usually happens next is a cop terminology. We usually call it verbal vomit. Because they start talking and give you more lies, and it turns out to be perfect. And the last one is the summary. Summarize what you've said. Once they're done, summarize it to make sure that you've understood it correctly, because communication is a two-way street. Here is an example. I think we have, it's real good. I think we have, here's an example of Gail King with R. Kelly. See if you can catch any of the active listening techniques here. It's real girls out there missing. There's real young girls out there being abducted, being raped, okay? They really are on chains. They really do have chains on their wrists, and they can't get out. They're ending up buried.
Robert, we have to have a conversation. Really, I don't want you just ranting at the camera.
Well, I came here for them to hear me talk. I need help.
What kind of help?
This is the kind of help I need.
Yes, what kind of help?
I need somebody to help me not have a big heart, because my heart is so big. people betray me, and I keep forgiving them.
You sound like you're playing the victim here. You sound like R. Kelly, you do. When I listen to you, it sounds like you're playing the victim.
I'm just telling the truth. And the reason I'm emotional,
But Robert,
I apologize for that.
No,
is because this is the first time I was able to say something. I said nothing.
What did you see then? What did she use?
Short-ended statements.
She what now?
Short-ended statements.
Short-ended statements, open-ended questions, what else? She did the emotional labeling? You sound like a victim here. And then you hear the reflecting in the mirror, and she started using words here. Right? She does a fantastic job of shit. I mean, it's one of the best examples of active listening I've seen. Right? And if you do watch the whole interview, she almost puts on a master class. Really. I mean, it's really effective at how she does these things. Okay? So now at your table, real quick, well actually we're at 10:30, so I want to get you out of here. But what I was going to have you do in communication, and feel free to start thinking about this on your own, I was going to have you summarize the case that we have in 4 sentences. 4 sentences, because clear and concise communication is more influential than how many of you have been in the meetings where you just want somebody to shut up. Well, I did this little exercise in a leadership class I went to, and he had us talk in 4 sentences only. And you'd be amazed at how you have to gather your thoughts and come to the conclusion, like, here's what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. It was one of the most effective exercises I've ever seen. So, think about it. If you talk today, 4 sentences or less. You can make your point, and then you're going to be able to influence people. You're going to be able to get information that you need. Lastly, here's my phone number, my email, my website. I hope we've covered all 3 things. Did you learn something new today?
Yes.
Besides, you're not as accessible as you think you are. You think about behavior?
Yes.
Good. Is that fun?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I think we're due for a break. I've got a couple of copies of leadership books up here if you're all interested in them. Come on up and see. If not, I think we have a 15-minute break. 15-minute break. Thank you, everybody.